Hello everybody and welcome back to Odin's Movie Vlog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we've got another amazing article by our boy Scatterboy Mendelson, who is showing us that the media honestly has no idea what actually happened when it came to Captain Marvel. It's so interesting to find how they were the ones to call out the trolls and all this stuff. Oh, look at how Captain Marvel's proving all of the trolls wrong, but then they failed to realize, okay, well, why did Captain Marvel do so well? Is it because a lot of people wanted to actually see Carol Danvers on screen? Is it because people actually wanted to see Brie Larson on screen? Is it because people just wanted to see a movie before Endgame that they were told ties into Endgame and therefore felt like they needed to see it? These are all questions that should be asked, and these are all questions that I think you start to see a pattern of, okay, this is actually more likely as to why this movie has done so well. So as it says, and not quite yet, Walt Disney's Captain Marvel has $990 million in global grosses. When it passes the billion-dollar mark later this week, it'll be the 7th MCU movie to cross this milestone, along with the second no Tony Stark required offering to do so in just over a year, presuming Avengers Endgame gets there, and yeah, that's a pretty safe bet. I would agree with that. The Marvel Cinematic Universe will have 8 of the 22 films in the billion-dollar club, presuming the Brie Larson, Samuel L. Jackson, Reggie, the Cat flick gets to $400 million domestic. It also gives the MCU 7 $400 million plus earners, sans inflation. For what it's worth, Iron Man earned $318 million in 2008 without IMAX or 3D bumps, which would be just over $400 million in 2019 ticket prices. And so basically they're looking at this, or at least Scatterboy Mendelson is, and you know that he's not alone here. You know that they all tend to kind of, come together and agree on a lot of these other things, and they look at these numbers and they try and say, oh, look, see, all the narratives that we were trying to push in our articles are true after all, and then you remember, oh, wait, you shouldn't be pushing agendas in your articles because you're supposed to be writing for Forbes as a senior contributor for Hollywood Entertainment, and you're supposed to be, at least, from what I remember, you're supposed to be more of an objective mindset. I just, again, don't really understand it, but you're trying to say that because of the fact that Captain Marvel is going to be a billion-dollar film, because of the fact that Black Panther was over a billion-dollar film, that somehow this shows that the MCU doesn't really need to have the X-Men or the Fantastic Four being brought in. Here's the big problem with that. Why did Captain Marvel do so well? Why did Black Panther do so well? Let's start off with Black Panther. Black Panther, remember, it made $1.3 billion at the box office. Why did that film do so well? Oh, wait a minute, that's right. It made $700 million in the domestic market. It didn't really do nearly as well overseas as other films have done. It made $700 million domestically. Why is that the case? Well, because you had African-American representation on screen. You had African representation on screen, and a lot of people in the United States, there's a core contingency of audience that came out in droves to support the film. Now, some people try and spin those words to say, are you saying that only black people went to go see the movie? No, not at all. But if you're going to try to deny the fact that a lot of people in those communities did not go out in droves to support it because of the representation that was shown to them on screen, I'm sorry, but you're living in a fantasy realm. Just go ahead and look to Us, for example. The reason why Us is doing so well with the domestic market and not so much with the foreign market is because that movie with those characters means so much more to an audience here that is not really existent anywhere else, at least not to the same degree. So we look to that and we say, okay, why did Black Panther do well? Well, for one, you had that core audience, $700 million domestically. That's a huge cut. That's a gigantic number. You almost never see that kind of discrepancy between a domestic and a foreign total. The fact that the domestic total was so much higher than the foreign total is very, is a rare thing. Normally it's closer, 50-50. Sometimes it's 60-40, with more going to the foreign market because there's more money there, because there's, more countries, more people, and so it just makes a lot of sense. But why did Captain Marvel, or rather, why did Black Panther not do nearly as well in the foreign market? Again, because the story itself was written for more of an Americanized audience, which is why they went out to support it in droves, and also with the representation on screen. Many people in the African-American and Black communities here in the United States went out to support that film multiple times. And if you're going to say that that's not true, if you're going to say that that's racist, I'm sorry, but at that point, you're just living in a fantasy realm. All right, so that's the first part. The second part is that Black Panther had already been introduced in another film. Remember that T'Challa was introduced to us in a previous film called Civil War. And not only was he introduced, but he was given a pretty big, I would say, featured part, a big featured role, which introduces him so well, and also with the end of the film sets up for a Black Panther movie. So not only do you have Captain America Civil War, which is arguably one of the better MCU films because it's essentially an Avengers Junior film to actually introduce him in the first place, you take that into account, you take into account the audiences that are going to support it, the $700 million domestic take, and you realize, okay, this is explaining why that film did so well and why the film sequel will likely do as well, if not possibly even better, because there is a core audience set for it, and also the character was set up. And guess what? The character was set up very well. I love T'Challa's character in Civil War, and I also love T'Challa's character When you go to Infinity War, not really a big fan of it in Black Panther because I wasn't a big fan of Black Panther because I think that objectively speaking, the movie had a lot of flaws that way too many people overlooked for the sake of diversity and for the sake of virtue signaling and all these other things that honestly I think did more damage to the film than anything else. Because was it a good film? Sure, but it was a B-level film. It was like a B- type film, which again is fine, but it's definitely not in that A range like everyone was trying to say that it was. Like, it was one of the best MCU films of all time. People were saying that it was the best because it was so different and because it was diverse. But diversity and being different does not make, on an objective level, a film better. Those are subjective views. When you want to talk about objectivity, you talk about acting. Was the acting there? Yeah, absolutely. The acting was there. Then you look to the story. One could easily say that there's definitely some mixed stuff when it comes to the story and how everything comes together. With the editing too, the pacing, I would say that one could easily point there and say, okay, not up to snuff. And the one that definitely sticks out like a sore thumb is the CGI graphics, which I would say most people will say, especially that last third, are just awful, are just terrible. And so again, as I've just broken it down, that's the objective view versus the subjective, well, it was different and it was diverse. Again, there's nothing wrong with those things, and if you want to like a movie because of those things, you have every right to. But don't try and, put on the cover and put on the cloak of objectivity when you actually can't really do so nonetheless. So, there's Black Panther. It was given a great setup with Civil War. It was given a film that was guaranteed to have success because of the fact that it was appealing to an audience in the United States that was going to come out in droves. They gave it $700 million in the domestic box office. And also, it was a story that most people wanted to see because they had set it up correctly. Okay, that brings us to Captain Marvel. Why in the hell did Captain Marvel do so well? Well, as I said before, the reason why I predicted this wrong, the reason why I got the numbers wrong on Captain Marvel was because I very much underestimated the power of the MCU audience. I had totally underestimated the fact that over the past 11 years, there have been 22 films that have been building up an audience. Go all the way back to Iron Man 2008. Go all the way back to Incredible Hulk. Those films were made for comics fans. Those films had so many Easter eggs for comics fans in there, and it was made mostly for them. It was also, though, made to try and reach out to other people because they realized that if they tried to just make it for comics fans, it probably wouldn't have made any money. So they tried to normalize it a bit, and they were able to bring in some of this normie or popcorn fan audiences, as we like to call them. You do that for 11 years, and you start to slowly move away from the source material, slowly move away from trying to appeal to the comics fans, and eventually what you have is a giant normie popcorn fan audience that will go to see anything as long as you smack MCU on the title. And so that's what you have. You have a bunch of people saying, oh my gosh, it has MCU on the title, I must go see this movie. All right, so that's one part of the MCU. That's one part of Captain Marvel doing so well. What's the second part? Well, the second part is easily the fact that the media made it very clear that this was supposed to be the biggest and baddest and best movie ever of all time. By baddest, I mean the good kind of bad, of course. So when you take that into account, the fact that this movie was protected from day one, the fact that any person that even had a criticism, any person that even had a question or a doubt as to the intent behind the film, anyone that pointed out what Brie Larson said, any person that said anything even remotely negative towards this movie was instantly panned as sexist, and they wrote countless articles. They love to talk about how all of us made these countless numbers of videos on YouTube, but then they failed to recognize that there were just as many, if not more, articles being written that were just making things up, that were simply being put out there to protect Brie Larson, to protect this movie. It's so fascinating and so interesting that people are so willing to accept trolls and to accept certain, one side of the equation, but then they're willing to also, within any equation, ignore the other part of it, the other variables that they just cannot ignore if they want to come to any sort of logical conclusion. So you take into that account the media protection. Rotten Tomatoes, of course, makes it clear by the fact that they deleted reviews, the fact that they deleted the ratings, the fact that they changed their entire website. They deleted an entire function from their website just to protect this film. Oh no, they were planning on doing it for a long time. Oh really? Then why did it just conveniently happen right before Captain Marvel came out? I wonder. That's not conspiracy. That's just me pointing things out that are true and that are factual. And on top of that, YouTube changed its entire algorithm so that any video that was critical of Brie Larson, any video that talked about Brie Larson and Captain Marvel, was put down below at least 10 to 15 legitimate news sources that talked about the movie instead. People like Vox, people like BuzzFeed. Oh, because BuzzFeed, we all know how great and how reliable BuzzFeed news is, right? It's got that verified check mark, though, on YouTube, and so therefore it gets the preference. So yeah, we have this ultimate protection going on. We have the fact that this film was protected from day one. We have the fact that this film has been built up, or at least the audience has been built up, the normie popcorn film audience that's not going to care about the comics, that's not going to know anything about the fact that this character has been rebooted 8 times since 2012, that no one's buying the comic, and that the comic is so full of identity politics that it's lost any sense of originality to the point where people are just rejecting it completely. And then they look to all of this, and then all of a sudden they try and read articles because they might hear maybe on a YouTube video, oh, there's people saying some bad things about it. Oh, Rotten Tomatoes is kind of acting a little bit weird. Oh, they're changing their website. They read the articles. What do the articles say? Oh, it's a bunch of trolls. It's a bunch of sexist people. It's a bunch of white men, white male babies, you know, man babies that are just going out of their way, living in their mama's basements. And that's what they're reading, and they're believing it. Again, I've talked to the normies myself who have said, oh yeah, I thought the movie was fine. I thought the movie was okay. And then when I ask them, oh, did you hear about this? They say, oh yeah, that wasn't a bunch of trolls attacking them, which is a bunch of sexists. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. It wasn't actually. So that kind of confirms for me the fact that the entire cover-up by the media, the entire, you know, let's promote this film constantly campaign worked. It was able to convince the normies to the point where they either ignored it completely, or what they saw, they bought into. What they saw, they simply believed for the sake of believing it in general. Add on top of that one more thing as to why this film did well. They opened it in almost every single screen possible. I think the only MCU film that had more screen openings was Infinity War, which remember made over $2 billion. Not only that, but they also opened in China on the same day. They also, of course, had this movie open in every single premium format available. IMAX, 3D, Dolby, etc. And people might say, oh yeah, but other films, other Marvel films have had those similar types of releases. Here's the thing though. You can have a movie that has a release, but in order to really dig into this a little bit further, I looked into my own theaters. My own theaters had not offered 3D showings for several of the past Marvel films. This was the first Marvel film in about 3 or 4 films where there's been even a, single 3D showing. And yet this one had about 3 or 4 3D showings in its opening weekend. I looked at that and I say to myself, okay, so what does that mean? As I've mentioned before, I worked at a movie theater. What that means is that the bookers, the people who work on behalf of the theater and work with the studio then says, okay, this is what we want. If you want to show our film, you have this access, you have the ability to show 3D movies. Okay, we need you to show 5 3D showings every single day. And if you can do that, you get to have our movie. If you don't, then you can't have our movie. And so basically what Disney did here, based on just my own local theater, is that they told every theater that had the capacity for IMAX, for 3D, for anything, to have as many showings as possible in all of the major premium formats as possible, which guess what? Get the premium time slots, the 5 to 7 to 8 p.m. time slots, while the ones with only 1 or 2 screenings, the ones that have been out for a few weeks, they're the ones that get that random 4 o'clock show, or maybe that 9:45 p.m. show. They're the ones that get that random crappy show, because guess what? That's the last time that any theater producer, any theater manager is going to put in last. So you take in all of these things into account and you start to realize, okay, they basically made it so that this film could not fail. They already knew they had an established popcorn fan audience. They already raised the average ticket price by making it available overboard amounts in this premium format, in the various premium format, raising the average ticket price bought per person going to see it. It was made available in all of these theaters, which is the reason why you still see images of people showing half-empty theaters, because guess what? If you have it in all of these theaters and you have all those tickets costing that much more, guess what? It offsets. It offsets, and therefore it explains why a film will do so very well. The question that I have in mind, and the thing that Scott Mendelson and other people like him seem to not be able to realize, is that just because Black Panther did well, and I explained why it did well, and just because Captain Marvel did well, again I explained why it did well, that does not mean that after Endgame and post-Endgame, when a bunch of people seemingly are leaving, including huge names like Robert Downey Jr. and others, which are certain driving forces as to why films have done so well in the first place, if you're going to try and tell me that you're going to replace a Robert Downey Jr. with a Captain Marvel, with a Brie Larson, and your argument's going to be, well, she was in a $1 billion film. If you honestly think that people paid tickets to go see Brie Larson, I will tell you this much. That number is very small in comparison to just the regular everyday MCU fans that just want to see a movie because it came out exactly a month before Endgame and they thought, I have to see this because I want to make sure Endgame makes sense. I have to see this because I'm a completist and I want to see every MCU film. When you take this into account, Brie Larson is no Robert Downey Jr. and never will be. Personality-wise, for sure. Acting capacity, absolutely. And until Scott Mendelson and the other people like him start to accept this as a reality and start to realize that, no, MCU actually really does need X-Men, really does need Fantastic Four, because they're gonna need to be able to replace some of the giant names that they are losing. Yes, they've got some other people that they can fall back to. They still got Benedict Cumberbatch, most likely, who's gonna be Doctor Strange again. You still have Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther. You have some big names who are gonna bring in the people. But if you're trying to tell me that any of them are on the same level as a Robert Downey Jr. or a Chris Evans, and those two are the most likely to leave, I would even say Samuel L. Jackson has the potential to leave as well. If you think that those three can be easily replaced by some of these smaller named actors and actresses like Brie Larson, I'm sorry, but you're not really having any proof yet to this point. As I've just explained, the $1 billion for Captain Marvel and the $1 billion plus for Black Panther can be explained in a very, very cohesive way, in a very concise and very precise way. So no, X-Men, Fantastic Four, these are characters that they need, and they need to be able to cast people that are going to bring in new audiences, but also be able to maintain the other ones. Once Endgame comes out, there's going to be a drop-off. The question is, how much of a drop-off is there going to be? And these are going to be people who came to see these movies for Robert Downey Jr., for Iron Man, for all these other characters. If you have 1, 2, 3, 4 characters leaving, and upwards of that, you're going to lose people. That's just a given. The question is, how many do you retain, and how do you stop the bleeding from happening? And if your thought process is, oh, we're going to have Brie Larson come in, and she's going to save everything, I'm sorry, but based on the fact that now you have articles coming out saying Captain Marvel's twist, Avengers twist, the MCU's lamest moment, when her name of the Avengers was based off of the name that was on her jet, even though historically those names aren't put on jets. If you're going to go ahead and say that that's the reason why, if you're going to go ahead and say that the person behind Unicorn Store, who, again, on Twitter retweeted somebody and got a bunch of people to go after a person to the point where they had to delete their profile, or rather to make their profile private on Twitter, because she has such thin skin that she can't take any criticism, but now her movie's getting plastered because of the direction not matching up with the writing. Oh yeah, who could have called that coming? On, Rotten Tomatoes, 68%, but the top critics, drops all the way down to 25. But this is the person that you think is going to be able to make up for X-Men to the point where they don't need them? Scott, man, come on. Wake up. Anyway, guys, what's y'all's thoughts about this? Do you think that the X-Men are not needed? Do you think that Brie Larson is enough? Do you think that Captain Marvel and Black Panther are proof positive that movies will make money because people actually want to see them and not for a bunch of other, circumstances that are easily to explain? As I said before, Captain Hindsight's 2020, and I'm looking at the Captain Marvel numbers and I'm looking at the Black Panther numbers, and I'm able to see there are reasons as to why the films have done so well. Again, there's a reason why Black Panther did $1 billion, and it's because of $700 million it made domestically. If that film had not done well domestically, it would have reached $1 billion because it was not being nearly as well received, across the world as it was here in the United States. Again, we have to understand the cultural impact and the cultural reasons for that. Brie Larson, we have to understand that with Captain Marvel, there are certain reasons as to why this film made so much money. And it's not because it sold more tickets than anyone else. It's because out of the tickets that were sold, it was available and made, the ticket prices were much higher than for previous films on average by a great amount, and also was made available in almost every single theater possible on the same exact weekend. When you take all these things, and the normies, and the popcorn fans, and all these other things into factor, things make a lot more sense. I would love to hear your thoughts about all of this in the comments below. Also, guys, please smash the like button, give me a thumbs up, give me a subscribe. Also, hit the bell if you want to see my videos. Apparently, notifications aren't going out. Even for my live streams, notifications are not going out. So please make sure the bell is ticked off if you care about this content, if you want to see the content on this channel, and if you want to be knowing about those live streams too, because apparently YouTube's algorithm and YouTube services continue to fight against the content creator. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless.